Making a handmade journal is easier than you may think. Today we'll be demonstrating how to make a journal using the Coptic Stitch Binding method. Our example today will include a hardcover. First, we'll review the materials you'll need. To be honest, most of this video will be about the materials you'll need to create the journal. Choice of materials includes some basic tools, paper and cover board selection, and how to determine how many pages to add to your journal. Taking a little more time for the orientation will help you to use your resources wisely and feel more satisfied that what you've created will meet your needs. I'll also include possible substitutions if you don't have the same materials I'm using. So for your materials, here's just a quick overview of what you might want. So you'll want paper for your journal, cardboard for your journal cover, which we're going to use the back of this pad, decorative paper or fabric for the cover, glue and a glue brush or double-sided tape, wax thread, a tapestry needle, binder clips, a bone folder, a pencil, craft knife, scissors, an awl, a ruler, and a cutting mat or just something to go underneath to protect your surface when you're cutting. Now let's talk about each of these materials so you'll know how to make your selection or what substitutions you might need to make. So for the paper, the type of paper you use inside your journal really depends on how you want to use your journal. If you expect that you'll be mostly writing, sketching with pencils, charcoal, crayons, or gel pens, maybe a little bit of pasting, then regular copy paper or sketching or even decorative paper will work just fine. You could even use newsprint. These lightweight papers fold, wrinkle, and tear easily and are great if your work will be mostly dry. But if you plan to use watercolor, acrylics, gouache, gesso, and inks, or if you think you'll be doing much collage work, which may also get liquid from the glue, you'll want a heavier weight paper like a 140-pound watercolor paper. And today our demonstration will be using this inexpensive type of watercolor paper, but my favorite paper for journals is Arches. It has such a lovely feel to it and can really, I just love it. Can really hold up to your paints, your inks, your glue. But, it's also like I've made several journals with less expensive paper and they turn out just fine. So today's demonstration is using paper that is 9 inches by 12 inches because that's the size that I have on hand. But my favorite size of paper to use is the 10 by 14 inch. It's just a little bit bigger. And I've made journals using even smaller size paper. Here, let me show you. Like, here's one. Here's one that's a lot smaller. See, but I just find that I thought maybe they'd be easier to manage being smaller like this. Maybe I could stick them in my purse or a bag easier, but I find that for me, they just make me feel cramped. I have a hard time thinking about, I don't know how I'm going to fill it. So this is thinner paper. So see, I'm just writing in this. I'm using this one a little bit differently, doing some different type of design work in it. So it really just depends on how you're using it. And after you've made a few journals, because it really is pretty easy, you'll know what sizes work best for you. So to know how much inside paper you'll need for your journal, you'll want to consider how you'll be using your journal. So first, let's review a couple of terms. When binding a book, the paper that creates the pages is grouped and folded into signatures. So you can see this journal here has 4 signatures. There's a group, there's a group, there's a group, and there's a group. These signatures are then bound together to create the book. And when you open the journal, the area with a page on both the left and the right side is called a spread. When creating a visual journal like this, we often want to use the whole spread area for our visual expression. See how I've used this whole area. Here's another example of a whole area. So this is a little bit different than when we use a written journal, where we might just like write on this page and then come back to it another time and write like this. But for visual expression, we might turn it this way, right? But we use the whole spread. And a spread also includes those pages where the 2 signatures come together, like this. This is also a spread because the signatures are bound next to each other, but we typically don't count the first or the last page of the bound signatures as a spread. So when thinking about how much paper you'll want for your journal, you want to factor in how many spreads you'll want. 4 papers folded in half. See, each of these are folded in half. 1, 2, 3. That's 1. So 4 pages folded in half form a signature that will make 7 spreads. 3 pages folded in half to form a signature will make 5 spreads. And here we have 3 pages. So let's just show you how we don't count the first one or the last one. We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then the end. But we can see when we put 2 signatures together, then we actually kind of get a bonus, a bonus spread. So that's sort of like the +1. So for today's demonstration, we'll be making 3 signatures, each using 3 sheets of paper. Since 3 papers folded in half form a signature makes 5 spreads for a starting number of 15 spreads, but then we also get the spread where each signature is next to the other, so that gives me 2 more spreads. So for today's demonstration, we will have a journal with a total of 17 spreads. Now let's talk a little bit about cover boards. So a good sturdy cardboard will work well for your cover. You can use cardboard from a cereal box. I think for this one, this was, I think, actually it was the box. You can see kind of the box of a granola bar box. I cut off this side and then use this for my spine and the front and the back. This is not a Coptic Stitch Binding, so we're not doing this binding type today. But just so you could see that it's a pretty good cardboard that I could use. But today we're gonna just use the back of this pad of paper because it's a very sturdy piece of cardboard. I would not suggest, I would suggest that you not use corrugated cardboard because that can bend a little bit where it's corrugated. And today we're going to be covering our board with some decorative paper. But that step is completely optional. You can decorate your cover or not decorate it, any way you like. You can even use fabric, though if you do use fabric, you want to take care not to get wrinkles in it when you glue it down. All right, next let's talk about the glue and the glue brush. If you're making a cover board for your journal, you'll want some glue and an easy way to spread it around. So Regular white craft glue is fine. It's called PVA glue. And you'll want a fairly sturdy brush to help spread it around. To be honest, this is the brush I typically use. It's actually an artist bristle brush, but I clean it really well, and it still looks really great. Works really well. I use it for painting as well, but this Crayola brush is perfect. I just found this when I was going through some of my art supplies, and this would be a great glue brush. So today's demonstration, we're going to actually use this double-sided tape, which I've not done before. So we're gonna be learning that one together. But it looked pretty easy. I thought it would make for a great video. But you can also use glue and then spread it around with a brush. You'll want some wax thread. Using a wax thread really does make binding the book much easier. You probably hear my cat in the background. I think she might be jumping up here soon. She gets excited when she hears me talking. So I've tried regular sturdy thread and several strands of embroidery thread before, but the difference between using those and wax thread is night and day. If you don't have wax thread, or your wax thread isn't very waxy, because there she is. Hello, kitten. Come on, get down. Get down, there we go. You can actually get this sewer's wax and just run your thread through there to put a little more wax on it. I bought some wax thread and it just didn't really have any wax on it. I don't know how they could say it was wax thread. This, you can see the wax on it, right? Look how stiff that is. That's great. That will make it very easy to bind. You'll want a tapestry needle. It's a little heavier, and it has a blunter edge. It's not too sharp, and it has a bigger hole so you can get that thread through it. So you want a tapestry needle. You'll want some binder clips, and these help hold your pages together while you're binding. And if you don't have binder clips, you can use bobby pins or even large paper clips. And you may even feel you don't need them at all. It just really depends on how thick or thin your paper is, how difficult it is it sliding around a lot. Then you'll want something to hold it in place. And a bone folder. I love my bone folder, but I worked for years without one. Mainly, you'll want something that is smooth, without sharp edges. You can see kind of how this doesn't have any real sharp edges on it. And it will help crease the folds of your pages. But honestly, I've used rulers. I've even used, a lot of times I use this part of my scissors to help press the paper. So those also work well. You'll want a pencil. We'll need to make some marks where we'll be poking our holes for the thread. So a simple pencil will do fine. A craft knife is handy. You'll want that if you're going to make a cover board for your journal. You'll want something sharp to cut nice straight lines. So you can also use a razor blade. Scissors. If you don't have a cutting board, we'll be using a cutting board today, but scissors work fine. You'll just want to take care that your pages are cut evenly. And you'll also need the scissors for cutting the wax thread. And if you're decorating the cover board, we're going to be cutting this paper. You'll want an awl. You'll need an awl to poke the holes through the signatures and the cover board. If you don't have an awl, you can even use an ice pick or some kind of corn cob holders will work. Just something that you can poke a nice smooth round hole. Let's just see how that is. Nice smooth round hole through the cardboard and several layers of paper. So it's big enough for your tapestry needle to slide through easily. You'll want a ruler. You know what they say, measure twice, cut once. We'll be measuring to mark the even spaces for the holes, and a cutting mat. You'll want something underneath your cover board if you're cutting it with a sharp knife. When I didn't have a cutting mat, I used several layers of stiff cardboard or some other tough substance that could take a bit of slicing. So that's it for our materials and orientation. Now let's get to the fun part. We're starting by getting our paper ready. I'm just taking it right out of the tablet. There's no spiral binding on this, so I don't have to cut off those edges. I can just have a nice flat surface, which is great, or a flat edge. So get all of your pages ready, and then you'll want to, like we're using the back of the cardboard, so I'm just ripping that part off. Getting all the pages that we're going to bind together in the cardboard in place. Now I'm going to fold the cardboard here, and I'm doing them 3 pages at a time because this paper lets me do that. Sometimes I have to go through and fold each page 1 at a time, but I'm doing it 3 at a time. So based on the paper that you're using, just make the best decision. And you can smooth it all out with that bone folder or the back side of your scissors, whichever it is that you're using. Of course, you'll do this for each of the signatures. Just smoothing it out, lining it up. You want to make sure, if you are doing multiple pages at a time, just make sure they're lined up well. There we get a sense for how thick this journal might be. I ended up, and you'll see towards the end of this video, adding another signature to it. I had decided I wanted it to be just a little bit thicker, but at this point I had only made 3 groupings, 3 signatures. And now we're going to work on the journal cover. An art teacher that I had in high school taught me to make 3 marks when I needed to draw a straight line, because if you have 2 marks that aren't measured quite right, that third one will let you know that you're lining it up correctly. So I've often used 3 marks when I have to cut a straight line. And here I'm using my cutting board. You might use your X-Acto knife, whatever tools you have on hand. But I don't know, this is where it starts to get exciting to me. I feel a sense of a book. Like I'm creating a book, a journal that's going to have a lot of meaning for me. So it's pretty exciting. Now we're going to put the cover, put that paper on the journal cover. I've selected a couple of scrapbook papers that I liked. And you only need to leave, and this doesn't need to be super precise, about 1.5 to 2 inches. Enough that when it's folded over, you've got plenty there to glue on and hold it in place. So you see me measuring here to the size of the paper that I need, making 3 dots. Drawing the line and then cutting the paper to size. So I have to do this for the front cover and the back cover of the journal. And I never throw those cut off pieces of paper away because you never know when they might be useful for collaging in somewhere in this journal or in some other journal or mixed media work that I might be doing. So now I'm just drawing lines so I know where the edges are. And you'll see why we're going to have to cut those corners out. So I'm just drawing some guidelines there for the corners. I decided I was going to draw the lines all the way across the piece of paper. That's not really necessary, but for some reason I just thought I wanted that little extra security. Now notice how I'm making a little mark not quite at the corner. You don't want it to be right at the corner. You want to allow a little extra space so that the corner of the journal is also covered with the paper. And then drawing some lines that are angled in towards the inside of the paper. And then snipping that out. So it looks a little bit like the flap of an envelope there. And you can see how there's a little bit of paper left over there in the corners. Now I'm using this double-sided sticky tape, and I wanted to get it right up on the edges so that I know those edges are nice and secure. Then I realized while I'm doing this, I don't really have any waste paper beneath me, so typically when I'm gluing I have waste paper underneath so that the excess of the glue, or in this case the adhesive tape, will stick to that instead of my work surface. I'm just making sure that I've got a good covering all around the edges. Don't have to do the center of it because I've already got that on the cover. If you're using glue, you probably just want to glue the paper itself or the fabric, whatever you're using to cover your board. You don't need to do both. And then just fold those flaps over. Looks pretty good, smoothing it all out. Using my bone folder just to give a nice even pressure everywhere and make sure it's nice and smooth. And then repeat with the other cover. Then you'll see you've got two of them. Now we're going to do the what would we call that? Let's call that the inside cover. Now here you'll probably want to be a little more precise because this part is going to show. So I think I've left roughly about 3/8 of an inch. So whatever you decided you wanted to allow for that insight, just make sure that's uniform all the way around. Making those marks. So you can cut that inside cover paper to fit nice and neat on the inside. It's going to look lovely. I'm taking it over to the cutting board, giving that a nice slice there. See how that fits? And then I just repeat for the other cover. Now I'm going to stick it on, again using that tape If you're using glue, you'll just be using your glue brush. Sometimes with glue, it's helpful to water it down a little bit so it's easier to glide on, but the problem is you just want to make sure you're not getting too much water, that the glue is too thin and just doesn't stick as well. But if you're having problems with glue, don't hesitate to thin it down a little bit so it's something you can work with. Honestly, now that I've done it, I'm not sure which I like better, using the glue or this adhesive tapes. I can see benefits to both. If you do another journal, whatever you do for this one, you might want to try the other way. Glue one time and then adhesive tape another. All right, here what we're going to do, we're starting to mark the lines where we're going to pierce the holes so that we can bind this together with our Coptic stitch. And I just have them stacked. I'm doing 1 inch from each edge and making marks on the paper all the way down. You'll be able to see in a moment when I lift this up. See how I was able to make those 1 inch marks, and then I'm kind of going back over it to make sure everything's lined up well. And now it's really up to you how many holes you want to have and where you want those holes. Here I'm doing one in the center as well. Now I've seen lovely journals that might have 3 on one end and then a gap in the center and then 3 on the other end. In this situation, as you see, I'm doing 1 in the center, 1 on each end, and then I'm adding 2 more, which I don't know why I made this complicated. I could have just added 1 more and it would have been fine. I decided I wanted 2, so because of our imperial measurement system, it makes it it was a little trickier for me to find the right measurement for placing these holes evenly spaced. But the point is, you don't get all tied up in a knot about this. It's just you want them evenly spaced wherever you place it, whether you have a cluster of holes at one and each end, or you space them out evenly across the spine of the journal. You see me making the marks, little pencil marks. And if it's a fraction of an inch off, it's going to be fine. And I've also made those marks on the cover holes because we're piercing a little bit far from the edge. Now it might be 1/4 of an inch in from the edge on the covers. And this cardboard, ooh, that was tough. That was a very tough cardboard to get my all through. In retrospect, I wish I would have pierced the hole from the outside cover rather than from the inside cover out, because that cardboard, as you can see, and you'll see in some other shots, pushed towards the outside. And it's fine because once it's all bound, you don't really notice it. But that's one thing I think if I did this over again, I would do differently. Comparing to make sure I'm not getting too far off. Things are still lining up with each other. Poking those holes through that really tough cardboard, which also makes a really great book cover. And then doing the same with the other. Now I'm going to pierce the signatures and see how we go right at the fold mark of those signatures, and I'm using those binder clips to hold the papers together so they don't move around, and just right there on the fold. So they're set in a little bit, the holes are set in a little bit on the cover, but they're right on the fold for the signatures. And this will let us have a little bit of stitching showing on the covers, which is just a very nice, authentic, handmade look. So let's start binding this together. To get the right length of thread, I usually pull out about 2 times the length per item that I'm stitching on. So twice the length of the cover, twice the length for each signature. Always gives me ample. If for some reason you don't get enough thread pulled off, that's fine. You can always knot it off on the inside of a signature and start again. So it's not that big of a deal. Just keep going from there. So I'm tying a knot, and I apologize, I'll just let you know right off. My setup doesn't allow me to see what the camera is actually capturing. So there's a lot of places where you're going to see me working off the camera. It will just be momentary. I'll be back on the camera again. Just letting you know that that's going to be happening, like there. See, I'm completely off the camera, but you can see I'm piercing my needle through that first hole, pulling the thread through. It's got that nice knot, and I'm starting with that first signature, and then I go around to the outside of the cover and come up through that first hole of the cover. So you start with the first signature from the inside of the first hole, coming out to the outside of the cover, and then you loop it around that first stitch. And then once you've looped it around, you go back through that first hole of the signature. And that waxy thread makes it slide through there very well and helps it to be nice and strong, but it also, when you're working with it, can make it a little sticky. So coming through that second hole, around to the outside of the cover, kind of adjusting the tension. Every time you make a stitch, you kind of want to assess, is it too loose, is it too tight? Sorry for it being off camera. I did warn you, but you'll see it again, and actually on the next stitch it's going to look a little bit better. So I looped it around and I'm coming through. So I think that's where I figured out, ooh, I'm getting off camera a little bit. So this one you can see a little bit better. Coming through. Looping it around. Hello needle, there you are. Come on through. And then back through the signature. Give it a nice tug first. Oh, Got a little knot in there. It happens. But you catch it and it comes right out. There's no end, so it can make a really difficult tangle. Just a little loop. And I'm moving a little more quickly. I've adjusted the speed of the video because it's basically repeating the same thing, starting from the inside hole of the signature, going around to the outside of the cover, from the inside of the cover, looping around, and then back through the signature hole, moving down to the next hole. Now we come to the last hole. So once we do our loop around, we are now going to, instead of going back through that signature, we're going to start connecting it to the next signature. So going through the end hole there and pulling it all the way through. And from there you just move to the second hole from the end. Just kind of inspecting everything, seeing how it looks. Going in through that second hole. You know, if it helps to use binding clips even as you're sewing them on, just to keep the pages from moving around a little bit. I think that was my problem there. Then going down to the stitch beneath and looping it around and then coming back. I know I went off camera a little bit for that, but you will see in some of the other stitches a little bit better. So coming through, catching that stitch directly beneath it. Come on, needle. And then back through. And then you just repeat that, catching the stitch beneath. Looping, coming back through, and it starts making a nice little, almost looks like a knitted stitch, a nice little V-shaped stitch. And then again looping it through, and remember when you're at the end Instead of going back through that signature hole, that's when you bring on your next signature. Now we're getting ready to add that final signature in the cover, the back cover, and we do this at the same time. So getting that last signature and your back cover. Remember how when we're adding the next signature, we usually go from that end stitch to that signature, but because we're adding the cover, we go back in through the other cover from the outside, and looping it around, and then back through the hole of that signature that we're adding that final signature. So we go from the next to the last signature around the outside of the cover, looping it around and in through the hole of the signature that's next to the cover. And then just repeat that process through the remainder. Again, this might be a good situation to use those binder clips because sometimes those pages move around a little bit. Around to the outside of the cover, because we want that stitch to show on the outside. Bringing it through, looping it around the stitch beneath, and then through the hole of that last signature. Sometimes the thread can get in the way, or the knots can get in the way, so you just kind of move them to the side. You can find the hole. It's there. And then just keep repeating that process. Coming in through that hole of the signature to the outside of the cover, looping it around, catching that stitch from the previous signature, and then back through the hole of the end signature. We're nearly finished now, getting close, working on that last hole. Again, the process is still the same, starting from the inside of the signature, going to the outside of the cover, so we can get that outside stitch, pulling it through. Looping it around. Back through that last hole. And then just loop your thread around that last stitch and make a knot. I usually do a double knot because I want to make sure it's secure. And while I might enjoy this process, I don't want to have to do it over and over again if the binding comes undone, so I like a good knot there. And then looping the end through once, maybe twice, and giving it a snip. And this journal is finished. Now it's ready for me to fill with art, reflections, documenting my soul journey. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. Let me know. Thank you.